But this is what Frederick Douglass wrote in 1852. And as you listen to him, perhaps a little context, if you haven't taken time to see slavery's chill, you have to just take time and go see the paintings. It's amazing. This is what Frederick Douglass said in 1852. Remember, he had been a slave. "What to the American slave is your 4th of July, he said. I answer, a day that reveals to him more than any other day of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery. Your prayers, your hymns, your sermons, your thanksgivings, with all the religious parade and solemnity, are to the slave mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. This is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody. There is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than the people of these United States at this very hour." And if Minister Farrakhan said something like that, he would not be able to be heard, even as Frederick Douglass was not heard. The irony is, even as we hear the words of slavery in this nation and think of the story of the Haggadah during the Seder meal, we would hope to see the similarities between the struggles of the Jewish folks and the African American folks, and to see the similarities that are so apparent. Rabbi Abraham Heschel's mother and 2 sisters were murdered by the Gestapo. He never returned to where he was raised. His daughter Susanna quotes him as explaining, saying this, "If I would go to Poland or Germany, every stone, every tree would remind me of contempt, hatred, murder of children killed, mothers burned alive, human beings asphyxiated." The same Rabbi Heschel marched with Martin Luther King Jr. And a lot of folks didn't understand why he put himself in that risk. As he said, when he marched in Selma, my legs were praying. Transfiguration means a change. This kind only comes out with prayer. A story that might help explain my understanding of the world and how it changed. When I pastored on the south side of Chicago, we had one African American member, and in the time we lived there, it went from 72% African American to 98% African American. At the point that the worshiping congregation became about 50-50, 50% black, 50% white, the O.J. Simpson trial occurred. So just for the fun of it, how many folks think that he was guilty? How many folks think he's innocent? How many folks don't know or don't care? But a decade ago, if you lived in the south side of Chicago, you would have cared. The tension was starting to become palpable at coffee hour, and when the verdict was announced, I thought, Lord have mercy, how do I respond with grace to folks who vehemently think he is innocent and other folks who equally vehemently think he's guilty? So when I get confused in ministry or need wisdom, I contacted my father in ministry, Jeremiah Wright. Now in the old days, with WordPerfect or Microsoft Word, it was very easy to, I almost remember the shortcut, to put in little smiley faces. So when I would write to Jeremiah, I would have a little white smiley face. Not the goofy ones that you do in the text, you know, with the colon but like a real little smiley face. And he would reply to me in a cute little black smiley face. So it was very sweet, very cute. We would fax back and forth if it was something that was more urgent. And this was the problem. Oprah, who's a black woman, thought O.J. was guilty. And I was trying to convince Jeremiah that O.J. was guilty, because I figured if I could convince Jeremiah, I could convince my black folks, and there would be no more problems in the church. Clearly, y'all have been in church long enough to know how absurd that was. So finally, I thought, how can I explain this to him? How can I help him see the error of his ways? And I knew it. I figured it out. He has 2 daughters that are my age. And I faxed him, and this was like Saturday afternoon, right? We got to preach Sunday. I said, Jeremiah, what would you do if your daughters brought O.J. Simpson home to date? Yes! Check. checkmate, because of course he wouldn't want them to date because he's guilty. Jeremiah then yelled at me on the facts that I got back and said, I would say the same thing that I would say if they brought any self-centered blankety blank word deleted. And then he put in all capital letters, but it still wouldn't make him guilty. Totally different world perspectives. As a pastor of a lot of folks who are African American, I know what it's like to wait for a meeting and have this beautiful woman crying as she comes in, African American. She was driving an Audi. She had the audacity to come from Bergen County, which was predominantly white, down to Hudson County where we lived, that was every ethnic persuasion you could think of. And there were no broken taillights. Her license was up to date, registration, everything. No speeding. The police just wanted to let her know that they knew she was there. I know what it's like to go out to dinner with my beloved friend from seminary. He's in a tuxedo, I'm in a beautiful dress. We've had a fabulous meal, we're going up to Central Park. And he tries to flag down a cab. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cabs. I said, do you want me to get it? And we did a little experiment. Every cab I flagged stopped for me. And then I backed up, and he tried, and again, could never get a cab. So when friends of mine told me about Reverend Ed Pinkney of Benton Harbor, and that he was given 3 to 10 years, he's an African-American pastor, for quoting the Bible and criticizing the judge in the penal system for misplacement of the prisoners, I knew I had to go support him, because even if I disagree with some of his tactics, I knew that racism was at work. And that's how I met Minister Farrakhan. I heard him speak eloquently and powerfully regarding self-determination for black folks, heard him say nothing disparaging about anybody in Benton Harbor in 2009. And that's how my son and I ended up sitting behind Minister Farrakhan when we went to support Reverend Pinkney here in Grand Rapids in June of 2009, when Reverend Pinkney's case was overturned by the Michigan Appellate Court. By the way, I don't usually write every word of my sermon, but because this is so important, I want to get it right, I wrote it. Let me tell you this. I was on the phone with the white press, and they didn't perceive it was worthy of covering. White pastors that I asked to come presumed that there was something wrong with Reverend Pinkney. Why else would he have been sentenced? But I knew. But then 3 judges reviewed the case, 3 judges, and overturned the lower court's ruling. Rabbi Heschel said, when I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I'm old, I admire kind people. And so the change has been in Minister Farrakhan. I emailed colleagues who knew me well and know Minister Farrakhan. I asked them for wisdom these past few days. A wise priest who is white. And by the way, I was going to really keep with a warm and fuzzy sermon. It was really, really quite lovely. But I knew for me to keep my mouth shut would be complicit in that which I abhor. So the white priest wrote this to me from the south side of Chicago. I think you can say that you understand the statements the minister said early on were indeed easily understood as harsh. But if you listen to him over the years, he, like us, has grown and matured. He's a prophetic voice in our time who's done more for black men than any church. I'd also stress to all of those who condemn him that they've usually not ever heard him. Invite them to come and listen and make an informed judgment, not a hearsay one. Anyone who calls themselves a Christian should want that. This was the press release that Fountain Street released in the midst of the flurry of emails. Freedom of speech is a fundamental commitment of Fountain Street Church. At the time our sanctuary was constructed, which Judith brilliantly reminded us of, it had the greatest seating capacity of any hall in Grand Rapids and has always served as a public forum. It's often the venue of last resort for speakers and performers who are banned from other venues. Last week, when students from the local Nation of Islam study group asked Fountain Street to rent the facility for a presentation by Minister Farrakhan, we entered into a contract, as we do with numerous community groups. Fountain Street doesn't endorse the social political stances of Farrakhan or the Nation of Islam. We publicly proclaim our mission to be a house of prayer for all people. We are proud to be an institution with a strong history of inviting controversial, provocative voices into the public conversation, including Stokely Carmichael and Farrakhan's predecessor Malcolm X over 40 years ago.